Right around the time that the Gibson demo shop opened, I interviewed the guy who ran the department, and he told me that there were 70s and 80s Gibson prototypes in the vault that will eventually come for sale. Here we are about 5 years later. They're here. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. It's another drop in the Gibson Certified Vintage Collection. Except for this time, we're not talking about 50s, 60s era stuff. We're talking about the stuff I specialize in. Crazy, weird 70s, 80s. First up, we've got a 1986 Gibson US1 prototype in Cherry Sunburst. Easy to tell that this thing is a prototype. We've talked about this model quite in depth in this episode. In terms of Gibson Super Strats, in my opinion, this is one of the best ones outside of the M3 because it does everything a Gibson does well, being super fancy and boisterous and gaudy, while still vaguely being a Stratocaster shape. However, please look at a production level one. And now come back to our prototype. It looks strange, a little bit different, right? It's because the neck is set completely differently. It has a 17th fret join line, whereas on the production, it looks like it's either the 19th or 20th from this particular photo. So they've essentially pulled the neck out of the body a bit. That way our bridge and tailpiece isn't all the way down here being obnoxious, and then your pickups are really oddly spaced out. I can see why this thing was an early prototype that did not make it to full production, and those are the kinds of prototypes I like. But that really dark Heritage Cherry Sunburst finish is looking pretty cool, but that's not actually the only difference here. Pay special attention to your controls. The way US ones typically work is it's on-off switches for all your pickups. So this is your neck on-off, middle on-off, bridge on-off. That way you can get all the different combinations. But again, come over here, look how much space is in between each of them. Whereas over here, there's like almost nothing. So that's something that changed, and the spacing of these knobs in general. They're way farther apart on the production ones. I also noticed this has a Nashville-style bridge, whereas production level ones either had a Kaler, or believe it or not, a post-mounted ABR1. However, the hardware looks replaced to me, so I'm curious if that's actually sitting on Nashville equipment or not. But now, moving on to the face of the headstock, everything seems about right here from the prototypical stages. They've got the boisterous Gibson badge. That's my favorite thing about these things. And then, yeah, sure enough, on the back of the headstock, we have the Gibson Original Prototype decal. Now, it's important to note that starting around mid-1980s, they switched over to this style instead of the stamped-in version of this exact same dog bone shape. In my opinion, these are a little bit less collectible. I like the actual stamp because people can fake decals, but usually it's pretty easy to tell if you're dealing with a real prototype. I mean, look at how different and strange the serial number font and everything's looking. But there's actually one more special thing about this one. Take a look at the back. The way the US1 was created is they chamber out a body and fill it with balsa wood, and they called it chromite. It was later used on the Studio Light series in the 90s as well. But some US1s got a back veneer of maple to match the same that they had on the top. So don't get this twisted. This is not the only flamed and or quilted two-piece back on a US1, but it's very cool to see that the prototype does have this. And note the heel cap. The bulk majority of US1s do not have the heel cap or the figuring on the back. But that thing just looks fantastic in that blue case. But how much is it? $8,000. I'm kind of scared to refresh the page. Yeah, I figured that one was gonna go. I would have loved to have owned that since it's a unique prototype, but sadly, these came up at the worst possible time for me, so I could not buy anything. But I did get a good chuckle coming down here. The middle pickup was weak and expertly rewound by Gibson's pickup product manager, Jared Brandon. They always die, the single coils. Something about them, they self-destruct, even if they're locked away in the Gibson vault forever. I'm surprised they just didn't go ahead and rewind the neck because that one's just a ticking time bomb as well. But next up, to match the US1, you have to talk about the U-2. It was the sister model because it was a little bit more stripped down. It still had the same body. Now, most of the production ones actually switch over into a Gibson decal up here, but occasionally you can find this. But you can see similar things over here, like the routed out knob. It looks like the spacing was correct. These had a completely different trem system on it. According to Gibson, is a basswood body, so it doesn't have the whole chambered chromite thing going on. They were constructed differently, but we don't have any back binding on this one. You get the comfort cut. They still have the plastic on the back, just slightly peeled up. This one doesn't actually have the decals, being listed for $5,500, which is about 3 times more than those usually sell for. But it looks like they also had to rewind some pickups on this one. I would be shocked if this one's gone. Yeah, I think that one's gonna sit around a little bit. I'd reviewed one very similar to this that had some minor pickup swappings for our single coils for obvious reasons, but it had the Gibson badge, and I got, I think, 1100 for it. But now on to the next cool prototype, the Explorer XPL. We talked about these things in the Aldo Nova episode. The XPL series was essentially put the Explorer headstock on every other body shape, so how on earth do you do an Explorer XPL? Well, you give it a new Explorer headstock. This is affectionately known as the meat cleaver and or the hockey stick. It's certainly 80s to say the least. But then they radically changed up the body on this one. I have not reviewed a flame top version, but there is an old video of a black finished one. But this, it's got the double cream dirty fingers, a beautiful bound CMT. It looks like it might even have the posi locks on it. This is once again a marked original prototype dating to very early 85. However, as far as differences compared to the production runs, I don't see anything. I would be shocked if I refresh this page and it's still there. Wow, okay. Goes to show you, just because it's rare doesn't mean it's valuable. Because if you go to Reverb and you see guys asking $4,000 and whatnot, trust me, they just sit. There's not much demand for these. Generally speaking, you're in that 15 to 2,500-ish. Now the flame top versions with all the binding, they do sell for a premium, but even those tend to cap out around 3,500-ish for a nice one. However, that thing's unique enough, that'll sell. But to continue along the XPL series, here's the Spirit 2 XPL. The Spirit model in general is pretty cool. We talk about it in depth in this episode, but there's different versions of this. Some of them have the flame top, some don't. They actually started as an Epiphone model, believe it or not, and some of the Epis got rebadged as Gibsons, but they were USA-made Epiphones. But it's kind of like a double cut Les Paul Jr., but with a new fresh take on it, kind of Hamer-in style. And they also gave some of them the XPL treatment, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. Double cream Timshaw PAFs, you get the unique Schaller wrap tail, nice hot red finish, the binding really pops and accents that well. But then you get to the headstock, and instead of the regular open book style, it's obviously the Explorer, but what really catches my eye on this prototype is tiny Gibson logo. And it's flaking off to boot. Production level ones utilize what Explorers usually had, where it's a larger one that took up most of the headstock instead of just hugging this corner. But hey, you know what? That's all right. It makes it different from the regular ones. But as is common, the pressure from the tuners, even if it sits unplayed in a vault, they'll chip. And ooh, looking at this, that might actually be Candy Apple Red. And I had a viewer of the show reach out and say, you have to mention this. They're sending it out in a soft gig bag case for $5,000. Yeah, I agree. They could have gave it something a little nicer to respect the history of this piece. And at first I was thinking, you know what, it's because of the headstock and the weird body shape. It probably doesn't fit in anything. And maybe that is the case. They also could have just went to Reverb and bought one of these. Like, this is actually a really good candidate that's missing the supports, and they could have like retrofitted it, gave it the double neck rest, because it would fit that case just fine. And then it at least has a slightly error correct looking piece to it. This would normally be like a $2,500 max type of guitar. So double for the prototype, it would make sense to the right guy, and that's why it's gone. This next one, it's listed as an 83 Gibson Challenger prototype. If you need to catch up on this model, I documented a silver one pickup version in this episode. But it was essentially Gibson's new All-American series. The Corvus came out with this, as well as the Invader. They're not my favorite. They do a thing on a budget, and that's about it. But there were 1, 2, and 3 pickup versions, the 3 being single coils. So this appears to be a Challenger 1 because only the bridge pickup, same Schaller wrap tail piece. Everything looks about normal here. You've got the natural finish. But then look at your headstock. There's no logo. It's almost like they were embarrassed to put it on because it's one of those few times where Gibson does not have the open book headstock shape. It's just a bump up there. But they've got the Challenger truss rod cover on it. But then when you flip it over to the back, you can see it's got the regular serial number, but no decal. But we're still calling it a prototype. It looks to me like Gibson has personally, just today, stamped proto, because that's what we see in the demo shop. Whenever we see something like an original collection prototype show up, or just whatever they're selling off, like the Epiphones. I mean, you can't tell me that's not the exact same font we see on those, just put on over here. I have never seen that on an 80s. But the good news is it has a legitimate chainsaw case. So that's worth a couple $100 on its own, but generally speaking, a Challenger, $1,000 is a really clean, nice one. Whereas regulars are in that $500 to $800-ish range. So there's quite a premium on there. I could see how somebody might fall in love with that and think, hey, that's the cheapest prototype I've ever seen officially from Gibson. But now we get to get interesting with the Q/Alpha series. These are very bizarre guitars. So to see some of the prototypes, it kind of helps paint their tale. We documented one of them in this episode to its fullest extent. This model was initially developed to help win over Eddie Van Halen to come over to Gibson. At least the one pickup version was. There's actually one out there that has all the signatures of Eddie saying, hey, thanks for giving this to me. Not my style, but thanks. Bonus points for that one actually being stamped Gibson original prototype on the back of the body. But the Alpha series actually is fantastic. These are seriously underrated guitars. I ended up keeping this one in my collection simply because I'm not going to take $1,000 for it. I think it's worth $5,000 as a player. Incredibly lightweight, and it sounds phenomenal. But what's important to note here is the headstock style that was eventually used on these Alpha models. It's the Explorer XPL. Good old meat cleaver. Whereas the headstock that's on this one is what was used on the Corvus and Futura model. You know, Gibson's first headless design, they decided to put a headstock on it anyways. So before we even talk about anything, the fact that there's a set neck Corvus-like guitar caught my attention. But what's really unique about this pearl white one is pearl white is essentially a brand new finish at that time. They might have just been toying around with it. I know it just looks like alpine white, but this has a pearlescent coat to it. It will shine in the light. But it looks like they just slapped a Victory pickguard on it because the Alpha series, generally speaking, did not have pickguards. I mean, that's not even what it looks like. I mean, that's just what they did. They slapped it in there and changed your pickups a little bit. I mean, if you already got the design, why not try to use it? Now you can see, doesn't really fit. But hey, it's okay. It's research development prototype. Then we've got this guy over here. This is known as the Gibson Master Tune Vibrola. It was for flat top guitars. I'm curious about the body though. They're saying it's mahogany, borrowing the Victory body shape, but not its maple construction. It's just weird to see the Sad Richard headstock on this. So I agree with Gibson. That is an important evolutionary step. But they have that one priced at $6,000. A regular Alpha series, as I was telling you, usually between $1,000 and $2,000. So about a 3 times premium for a prototype on that. But they also had a Q200. So this version utilizes a P90 and a humbucker combination. They made these in a whole bunch of different pickup versions. And this one appears to have the different Kahler trim system on it. And I was thinking maybe they modified the layout, but no, it doesn't look like it. Pretty much the only thing different about this one is this is pure alpine white this time. And we get the Corvus headstock. So they were certainly one step closer on this one. But sure enough, we've got our fun little decal. That one was priced a little bit less at $5,000 and is still available for a home. And they also had one of my favorites, the Q3000, but this time in Ferrari red. If I could ever find a stop tail version of this guitar, which would be fantastic in a prototype sense, the 3P90 is a very cool combination. You can also find that on some Explorers in this time period. But this one, it's just Ferrari red with the headstock being different. I don't really see anything else to note about this one. So just kind of a fun footnote within Gibson's history. And that one's also offered at $5,000, and at the time of recording is available. Now, to be completely fair, I'm recording this like 5 hours after they were launched. And generally, despite what the market usually pays for things, Gibson Certified Vintage has a way of getting people to part with their money, as do prototypes in general. My comments here are just strictly to get you guys in the know as to what these models regularly sell for if you just buy one that is not a prototype. But in my opinion, the US1 prototype is the coolest thing that they've listed. So congratulations whoever picks those up. They are fantastic pieces of very, 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 well, depending on which year. This is 86, so it's technically Henry J era, but most likely designed during the end of the Norland days. Well, you know what, it does say 98. And if it is a prototype, because you got to remember, 1986, January 1st, that's when Henry J comes in. So it's cutting things close on a technical sense. But I think that is enough fun for tonight. I hope you enjoyed, learned something new, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on the next one. Take care.